I will begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed judges, fellow debaters, we as opposition strongly agree that Indonesian citizens do struggle to afford university. But is using loans really the solution? Let me put it this way. Imagine a small child, maybe 5 years of age, and you give her a shirt, but the shirt is an adult size XL. Do you think it would fit right? Do you think it would be right? The answer is, of course, no. And that is exactly what Proposition is doing. They are using Singapore's methods on a country like Indonesia, where Singapore and Indonesia are vastly different. In fact, let me point out that in the context of this motion, the context is American student loans, but instead Proposition proposes Singaporean student loans. But either way, they aren't suitable for Indonesia. Indonesia's economy is unable to fulfill what Singapore has because the economical state of those two countries are completely different. Therefore, today, opposition will show you that for Indonesia, student loans does not equal to increased education access. It traps graduates in debt and restricts freedom of choice for those who choose to loan. First, let us address government's claims. Government's entire mechanisms rely on income contingent payment. That does work for Singapore because their job opportunities are much more vast and the opportunities can subside for that. But there is a large proportion of Indonesia that already is unemployed, and even for those who are employed, an even larger proportion of them work in informal sectors that cannot be measured. This creates more competitions for the same jobs, meaning more unemployment. Not only that, Indonesian wages are already so minimal, almost impossible. Therefore, there is not enough money to cut to pay off debt while at the same time living rightfully as a human being. This creates more debt than they claim that they can reduce with loans. Third of all, the bond mentioned by Proposition creates a two-tier system between those who pay off their debt faster and those who aren't. And this is not just because of different social classes, but in Indonesia, it is very hard to get jobs in the first place. Some people remain unemployed for the longest time, so how do you ensure that the debt is paid off if they stay unemployed? In addition, there are also a lot of things that I would like to mention shortly before explaining it in my arguments, which is number one. Pro mentioned that if their family needs funds urgently, loans can help, but if they needed that urgently, student loans will make it worse because people will have to finish their education without working in the first place. So how does it help? And they said that scholarships are wasting universities' funds. But first of all, no single scholarship should cover everything. We can adjust it. And not only that, if the government says that, oh, we can subside loans, then why can't they put more funds for scholarships? Less burden, more opportunities. And the government has said that, oh, more graduates will equal to more tax revenue. But instead, it actually equals to more competition for the same limited jobs. The tax revenue theory is long-term, but the burden that comes after university is immediate. This leads to my first argument, which is that pros mechanisms so far cannot be guaranteed by the Indonesian government, which is why opposition proposes more realistic mechanisms. Because the real problem isn't simply that this university subject as a whole is expensive. It's that Indonesia's inflation makes it impossible for the citizens to catch up with the costs. So, our mechanisms attack the root issue, not just the symptom. We propose proportional tuition, for those with different social classes, adjusting it to how much their family makes, but also further measure the middle class population. So we are not excluding them from consideration. We are also creating adjustments. Let me further emphasize this. A student loan program requires guaranteed income tracking infrastructure, something that Indonesia's government already struggles on doing because of the many informal sectors. They say that, oh, money comes back, loans will give us our money back. But how can we ensure it if we don't track the incomes that come from the informal sector? They say that, well, but scholarships are more expensive. But if they presumably have the funds for this, they can expand scholarships, an option with less burdens, as I said before. This leads me to my second argument, which is that government funds the symptom, not the disease. I mentioned this earlier, and what I mean by this is that mentioned that a university degree often opens more job opportunities, and I agree. However, using loans as a solution is simply accepting degree inflation and asking government to fund it. We say, opposition says, attack the inflation. Regulate what we can. Invest in vocational credentials that doesn't lead to the same job opening that everyone is fighting for. That way people can actually stay employed because people apply for different jobs that are already provided. So, the job opportunities in Indonesia that isn't fulfilled can actually be fulfilled, and ones that people are pining for aren't overfilled. And as I mentioned, proposition mentioned more tax equals to more graduates, or more graduates equal to more tax revenue. But this is simply trading a known harm that is burden and pressure for a maybe possible, maybe not, someday, maybe far away benefit that we haven't even experienced once. Therefore, government gave you a Singapore-designed mechanism, applied it to Indonesia, and then enforced it using non-existing infrastructure. And then they paid it using pressing money that may or may not be enough for daily living even before the cut. This supposed bond traps not just the poor, but also the middle class. Not only that, it completely neglects the invisible incomes that are present in Indonesia. Opposition gives you a model that not only reduces costs, it also reduces burdens and builds more pathways for all citizens. In conclusion, opposition doesn't reject inclusive education. We reject debt as the price of education. And that is why we as opposition are still very much strongly opposing. Thank you.